I don't want your last name anymore. Those 7 words didn't just land, they detonated. Right there in the middle of the sunroom, surrounded by crystal stemware and fresh flower arrangements and people who thought they understood what power looked like. The whole room froze. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died mid-syllable. My son stood up straight, shoulders back, looking directly at me with the kind of manufactured confidence that only teenagers and con men can pull off. Then came the second hit. My new dad says you're a loser, Garrett said, loud enough for the whole table. He's the man I actually look up to. Laughter. Two of his step-cousins at the far end snorted like they'd been waiting for this moment. One of them slow-clapped. I heard somebody whisper, "damn," under their breath. And my ex-wife, Patricia, she just beamed, lifted her champagne flute in my direction like I was the guest of honor at my own humiliation. That practiced smirk she always wore when she thought she'd scored a point. The one she'd been perfecting since before the divorce was even final. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I reached into the folder I'd brought along specifically for this occasion, pulled out a sealed envelope, and set it flat on the table in front of Garrett. Then I uncapped my pen, laid it gently beside the paper, and slid both across the tablecloth toward him. "That's fine," I said, "and sign here, son." No drama, no lecture. I didn't ask him to think it over, didn't try to guilt him, didn't even raise my voice. I just waited. Because I wasn't angry, I was done. There's a difference, and it matters. He hesitated maybe 2 seconds. Then he grabbed the pen and scrawled his name across the bottom like he was signing a permission slip for a field trip. It wasn't just a signature. It was the erasure of a history I had built for him, quietly and methodically, over 22 years. I was the one holding him in the delivery room. I was the one who stayed when Patricia ran off for that yoga retreat that turned into something else entirely back in 2009. I taught him to ride a bike. I took a second job to keep him in that prep school when the economy went sideways. I came home every single night dead on my feet and still sat at the kitchen table with him to go over spelling lists and history flashcards. None of that mattered now, not to him. And the worst part? I wasn't even surprised. Somewhere between his 13th birthday and this brunch, Garrett had stopped being my son and started becoming hers. Her voice echoed in his opinions. Her particular brand of vanity had taken root in his ambitions. Even his new haircut, the one he'd insisted on getting just last week, was a carbon copy of his stepfather's. Brandon Whitfield, the tech investor with the aggressively white veneers and a laugh that sounded like a car alarm going off in a parking garage. The man who called me Jerry every single time our paths crossed, even after I corrected him 3 times. "Sorry, Gerald," right. Like it was a joke. Like I was the joke. Garrett's signature sat crooked on the page, still drying. He looked up at me with this little half smile. "Thanks, Dad," he said, and the way he said it made the word sound like an insult. I mean, Gerald. I folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, tucked it into my jacket pocket. Then I picked up my glass. "To Garrett," I said, keeping my voice completely level. "May you get everything you've just asked for." A few people laughed, a few winced. One of the step-cousins said, "Whoa," under his breath, like he was watching a car slide through a red light in slow motion. But it didn't matter. The line had been crossed, not just in ink, but in something that runs deeper than ink. And the beautiful part? Garrett had absolutely no idea what he'd just done. None of them did. See, there's a reason I brought that waiver of legacy to brunch. Not out of spite, out of preparation. Because I'd known this was coming for a while. I knew the second I heard Garrett had started calling Brandon Dad to his friends at school. I knew when Patricia changed her last name back, 2 weeks after the divorce papers were dry. I knew when Garrett stopped responding to my messages, but started tagging the new family unit in every Instagram post, every story, every carefully curated snapshot of his upgraded life. This wasn't a phase, it was a campaign, and the brunch was their little victory parade. What they didn't know, and what they couldn't have guessed in 1,000 years, is that I'd spent 4 decades building something far more substantial than feelings. I'd built a system, a legal framework, a fortress designed to look like a garden, and all of it was tied to one single thread: the name. You carry the name, you carry the key. You drop the name, the door shuts behind you. Permanently. And thanks to that little performance over Eggs Benedict, the door had just slammed shut. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and left the brunch without touching dessert. Back home, I poured myself a scotch. No chaser, no music, just the silence of a house finally free from footsteps that never quite fit the floors anyway. I didn't cry, didn't curse. I opened the safe, pulled out the family charter, and turned to clause 17.4. Garrett thought he'd cut me out of his life. He had no idea I'd just cut him out of the future. The house was quiet in that particular way that only expensive insulation and genuine loneliness can produce. No creaking beams, no settling floors, just the low hum of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the occasional distant bark from the neighbor's retriever. I poured a second drink, not out of habit, but out of ceremony. Some moments require ritual. This was one of them. I took the folder from my jacket pocket and laid it flat on the desk. Garrett's signature stared back at me, proud, defiant, slightly cocky, slanted left, like he couldn't wait to get it over with. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was second-guessing anything, but because I wanted to remember exactly how easily it had all come apart. That signature wasn't symbolic. I'd made sure of that when I drafted the waiver with my legal team 3 years earlier, right around the time I started noticing Garrett using my name less and referring to Brandon as the real provider more. I'd watched from the background as my presence became optional, then inconvenient, then simply erased. I hadn't reacted publicly. Instead, I'd quietly adjusted the architecture. Clause 17.4 was obscure by design. Buried deep inside the family charter, it was originally drafted by my grandfather during the Korean War, a mechanism for dealing with defectors, literal ones. I'd reworked it with modern language and digital equivalents, folded it back into the trust under a revision labeled Beneficiary Alignment Protocol, dry language for a very sharp instrument. I reached for the landline. Not the cell, the landline. Some calls shouldn't live in cloud storage. The first ring barely finished before the click. Gerald. My state attorney's voice came through, alert but calm. Philip Horace had been with me through 2 audits, a federal contract dispute, and one very delicate situation involving a cousin's rehab clause. The man doesn't rattle. I want to initiate clause 17.4, I said, effective immediately. There was a pause, a real one, not a stutter, but the kind of pause where you can almost hear someone flipping open a file in their head. That's, he exhaled slowly. Gerald, that disinherits him retroactively. It voids all held allocations, education, healthcare, ceremonial roles. You understand that? Yes, I said, still staring at Garrett's looping signature. That's what he asked for. Philip didn't argue. He just said, understood. I'll initiate the sequence. Do you want to notify the advisory board yourself, or should I handle it? You handle it. Keep it quiet. I'll draft a follow-up letter for the family council. Nothing dramatic. Copy that. He hung up. No platitudes, no condolences. Just execution. I appreciated that more than he probably knew. I turned in my chair and looked at the wall where the original family tree sketch hung. Hand-drawn, framed in walnut, there since before Garrett was born. His name, like the others, was written on a small golden band beneath his branch. I took it off the wall. Not to destroy it, I don't destroy history. But some artifacts belong in the archives, not on display. I opened the encrypted folder on my computer and began moving Garrett's beneficiary files into the inactive directory. Each click felt like a shovel finding dirt. College fund revoked. Healthcare access suspended. Property succession terminated. He'd walked into that brunch thinking he was scoring points for social media. What he'd actually done was activate a clause so old the ink on it predates Bluetooth. The beauty of clause 17.4 isn't just that it disinherits a person. It rewrites the entire inheritance map. No appeal, no renegotiation. It locks. And once it locks, every branch tied to that name becomes a dead limb in the legal structure. No flow of funds, no residuals, not even ceremonial invitations. Garrett, without knowing it, hadn't just cut himself out. He'd forfeited everything tied to that bloodline's legal identity. And here's the part that still makes me shake my head a little. Legally, I didn't disown him. He disowned himself with a witnessed signature in public, while his friends filmed it. One of them posted it with the caption, "Bro divorcing his dad at brunch LMAOU." I saved it to my evidence folder. It would be useful if this ever got contested. It won't. But I like backups. I closed the laptop, locked the file drawer, and turned off the desk lamp. This wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. A kid doesn't owe his father loyalty, but he ought to understand the weight of a name before he throws it away in front of an audience. Garrett thought he was burning a bridge. He didn't realize it was the only one that led anywhere worth going. The cascade started with a silent update to a secure server. At precisely 9:03 the next morning, I logged into the estate management platform. 3-factor authentication, rotating access codes, cold storage backup in a Nevada safety deposit box. Thumbprint confirmed. Retina confirmed. Passphrase, "The name endures," confirmed. I navigated to the beneficiary structure module. There he was, Garrett Allen Caldwell. Status, active. One keystroke. Edit. The system prompted, "Update beneficiary status." I selected the dropdown. Active to void. Voluntary name severance, clause 17.4. A red flag icon appeared next to his name. I clicked save. This action cannot be undone. I entered the master override password, the one Philip made me memorize and never write down, and hit enter. Done. Just like that, Garrett ceased to exist inside the legal universe I had built. To the outside world, he was still a high school graduate with over 200,000 social media followers and a pending admission to a state university on a legacy scholarship. But to the family trust, he was a ghost, a name that no longer matched, a non-entity. The surname clause wasn't performative. It was foundational. Every document tied to our estate, land parcels, corporate voting shares, foundation memberships, required active alignment with the Caldwell name. Garrett's public renunciation of it, witnessed and documented, had triggered the algorithmic firewall embedded in the trust logic. And unlike people, systems don't forgive. The cascade spread like a quiet infection. The lake property, technically held under a subsidiary, whose bylaws only permit lineage, title holders, to access or co-sign withdrawals, his permissions revoked. The Caldwell family artifacts, my grandfather's war medals, first edition law texts passed through 5 generations, marked ineligible for transfer. The Caldwell Foundation scholarship, where Garrett was next in line for a full ride, flagged and retracted by the trustees. The clause read clearly, "Reserved for descendants in name and deed. Voting rights in Caldwell Holdings, Inc." Garrett had no idea, but he was set to receive a 3.5% passive voting share on his 21st birthday. Gone. Transferred back to the legacy reserve pool. All automated, all airtight. Around 10:17, the system generated a notification. Estate alignment update complete. Advisory board members will be notified. I exhaled, not out of relief, but out of confirmation. There was no joy in any of this. I wasn't celebrating. I was just flipping the circuit breaker in a house that no longer needed to stay lit. At 11:42, I got a message from the Trust General Counsel. Short, clinical, precise. Per your directive, Clause 17.4 activation has propagated to all linked structures. Garrett Caldwell's renunciation is legally recognized as a surrender of claim. As of this timestamp, he holds no residual beneficiary status. His legal identification mismatch renders him incompatible with all surname lock protocols. No further action required unless reversal protocol is initiated. Requires full board vote plus unanimous family council approval. Unanimous. There's no such thing as unanimous when you build a structure on pride and precedent. That was the point. I closed the laptop, But the work continued in the background. Automated messages to the estate's external partners began queuing: accountants, property managers, education liaisons, heritage conservators, all receiving the same quiet update. Garrett Caldwell is no longer recognized. By 2 in the afternoon, one of the family historians had already archived his name in the non-aligned descendants section. His photo, once slated for the next printed family tree, was replaced with a placeholder. Entry revoked by waiver clause. I walked outside and stood in the garden, watching the wind move through the hedges I'd planted 20 years ago when Garrett was still in diapers. I remembered teaching him how to prune roses, how to tie his shoes, how to open the side gate using the hidden latch panel. He'd forgotten every lesson I gave him. I hadn't forgotten a single safeguard. The estate, the legacy, the entire machinery of memory and wealth. I didn't build it for sentiment. I built it to last. And that meant knowing when to lock the gates, even when you were locking them behind your own blood. The first post went up at 7:12 that evening. A filtered photo. Garrett sitting on the hood of Brandon's Escalade, one foot planted on the bumper, like he'd just won something. Caption: finally dropped that loser's name. Feels good. All caps, 2 fist emojis, 1 crown. The comments came fast. His school friends piling on with their W's and fire emojis. Girls from his media class dropping hearts. And then, of course, Patricia's comment. 3 red hearts, no words. Just approval, pure and simple. I watched it from my study, the screen casting a pale glow across the room. I didn't even have to scroll. The algorithm brought it to me. I was still technically tagged in some older family photos, ones they hadn't scrubbed yet. 2 hours later came the second post, a staged candid of Garrett, walking next to Brandon on a golf course. Matching polos, identical short haircuts, the same smug grins, like a beer commercial directed by someone who'd never met an actual father. The caption was a masterclass in unearned confidence. Proud to be taking his last name soon. Respect is earned. Another wave of support. But underneath the cheering, something else was starting to show, like water seeping under a door. A distant cousin commented, "Isn't this the same guy who missed your birthday 3 years running?" An older relative wrote simply, "Wow." No punctuation, just wow. You could feel the discomfort starting to form. But Garrett didn't notice, or didn't care. Probably both. He was too busy swimming in his own declaration to feel the current shifting beneath him. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that those posts were already tagged, archived, and time-stamped in the estate's legal server under the heading Voluntary Severance Proof, Social Affirmation. It sounds bureaucratic, but these weren't digital tantrums. They were legal receipts. The clause we triggered didn't just require a signed document. It required demonstrable public confirmation of name renunciation for the severance to hold up under fiduciary audit. And Garrett, bless his proud little heart, had given us 2 solid confirmations in under 24 hours. Voluntary, public, celebrated. Brandon even shared it to his LinkedIn with some line about blending families through love and leadership. That was the moment I stopped resenting the man entirely. He wasn't a threat, he was a mirror, and Garrett had looked into it and mistaken his own reflection for a window. Patricia's third post came at midnight. A black and white photo of Garrett as a toddler, holding my hand, cropped so my face was out of frame. Caption: growth is letting go of what was never real. Broken heart emoji. Sparkles. It got over 300 likes. I stared at it without expression. Not because it didn't land somewhere below the surface. It did. But because it finally explained everything. This wasn't betrayal. It was revelation. I had always suspected where Garrett's loyalties actually lived. I'd ignored the quiet signals. The eye rolls whenever I mentioned the family legacy. The way he never once asked about the company I was building for him. The time he told a friend, just loud enough for me to hear, that business suits are for guys who peaked at 40. What I was watching now wasn't rejection. It was confirmation that everything I'd feared he might become, he had. And not only had he become it, he was broadcasting it. For me, That was enough. Not to forgive, but to stop doubting. People think silence equals defeat. They post louder, brag harder, thinking they're scoring points on some invisible scoreboard. But silence isn't surrender. It's surveillance. I screenshotted everything, uploaded it to the legal server with hash verification. We had what we needed. Every like, every comment, every hashtag. They weren't memories anymore. They were exhibits. The first tremor hit quietly. No explosion, no dramatic announcement. Just a small red warning banner at the top of the Garrett's College Financial Aid portal. Your scholarship eligibility has been revoked due to a change in status. Please contact your fund administrator for clarification. That was it. No breakdown of numbers, no explanation. Just a system notice that might as well have said good luck figuring this one out. He refreshed the page 3 times. Logged out, logged back in. Same result. The Caldwell Legacy Grant, the one we'd structured years ago as part of a dedicated educational fund for bloodline descendants, was simply gone, like it had never existed. The portal now showed a balance due of $42,800 for the upcoming semester. Garrett stared at the screen, then opened a new tab and searched Scholarship Revocation Glitch. As if Google could reverse what he'd voluntarily signed in front of a room full of witnesses. He called the university office, voicemail. He called the financial aid line, hold music, then nothing. By the 4th attempt, he was pacing the room, checking his Wi-Fi signal like bad reception was somehow responsible for a legal cascade that had been in motion for over 72 hours. Eventually, he called Patricia. It's probably just a system error, she said casually, the clink of a wine glass audible in the background. These portals are always a mess this time of year. I'll make some calls. Garrett calmed down temporarily. Because that's the thing about ignorance. It's a comfort drug. It numbs you right up until the moment the scalpel cuts deeper than the anesthesia can reach. 3 hours later, Patricia got the call. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered on speaker, half distracted, still stirring something on the stove. This is Patricia. A pause. Then a voice she didn't recognize. Measured, professional, carrying the particular weight of someone who delivers bad news for a living. Ma'am, this is Philip Horace, lead counsel for the Caldwell Estate and Trust. I'm calling to speak with you regarding a document your son signed last week. She went still. I'm sorry, who are you again? Philip Horace. Clause 1704 was triggered upon signature. I'm calling to ensure you understand what that document entailed. The sound of the burner clicking off. Clause what? Clause 17.4, he repeated, patient as stone. Voluntary name severance. Under the terms of the family charter, your son's signature voided his eligibility for all benefits, financial or otherwise, administered under the Caldwell name. That includes the Caldwell Legacy Scholarship. Wait, no. That's his college fund. That was already approved. You can't just... Respectfully, Philip cut in, his voice not unkind, but absolutely immovable. Your son's voluntary renunciation of the Caldwell surname constitutes legal disassociation from the family line as outlined in the trust. Clause 1704 is binding. There is no appeal process for a beneficiary who has nullified their own eligibility through voluntary, witnessed, publicly documented means. I'm extending this courtesy call so you understand the situation before the advisory board issues the formal letter. Silence. You could almost hear the color leaving her face. You're actually going through with this, she said. Not a question anymore. It's already done, ma'am. Another silence. Then the call disconnected. She didn't hang up. She dropped the phone. Garrett was nearby, reading her expression like a map with all the roads suddenly gone. The confidence he'd been wearing all week, that strut of a boy who'd finally declared his independence, started to crack right down the middle. For the first time since that brunch, I think he felt something cold settle at the bottom of his stomach. Not just fear, consequences. There's a difference, and he was learning it the hard way. They had played the whole thing like a PR stunt, a symbolic gesture, a social media moment. But the trust wasn't symbolic. It was a machine. And once you pulled the wrong lever, the gears didn't grind or hesitate. They spun cold, fast, and without any interest in your feelings about the matter. That night, Garrett sent an email to the university. Then another. Then 3 more. He left increasingly desperate voicemails. He even posted in a student forum asking if anyone else had lost a scholarship over a family name technicality. No replies, not even pity likes. At 2:17 in the morning, he sent his first text to me in over 6 months. "Hey, can we talk?" I didn't reply. Not because I was enjoying the silence. I wasn't, not really. But because that silence wasn't mine to break anymore. It belonged to the system he had voluntarily walked away from. They showed up just after noon, a mother-son pair trying very hard to look like they weren't in a crisis. Garrett sat in the passenger seat of Patricia's leased BMW, arms crossed, jaw tight, scrolling his phone without looking at anything. Patricia drove like someone who was late to an appointment she didn't want to keep. Short turns, white knuckles on the wheel, no music. For once, neither of them was performing anything for an audience. The gate came into view. Tall iron bars that used to mean home, now looking more like a verdict. Patricia pressed the call button at the keypad. Buzz. Silence. She tried again. Nothing. She typed in the old gate code. The keypad blinked red. "What the?" she muttered. Garrett leaned forward, watching her try it again, slower this time, like the numbers might respond to patience. Same red light. She tried a second code, a third. Each rejection felt louder than the last, even though the keypad made no sound at all. Finally, she got out of the car and walked up to the speaker, pressing the button and holding it. "Gerald." Her voice was clipped, controlled. "It's Patricia. We need to talk." Nothing. "I know you're home. This is completely ridiculous." The gate didn't even buzz. Just then, the side gate, the old service entrance tucked near the hedgerow, opened a crack. An elderly neighbor stepped through, walking a small dog, wearing a bandana that said, "Rescue me." "Oh, hi," Patricia said quickly, her voice flipping into social mode like a reflex. "Is Gerald inside? We can't seem to reach him." The neighbor didn't smile. He moved. That single sentence knocked the air out of the conversation. What? "He moved," the woman repeated, securing the leash. "Said he was making some changes. Privacy matters, something like that. Didn't say where." Garrett leaned his head out the car window. "Moved as in, moved out?" "Yep." She shrugged, not unkindly. "Big moving truck came last weekend. Quiet crew. They even took down the flagpole." Patricia blinked, trying to do the math. "But his whole life is here." The neighbor looked at her with the kind of polite pity that only comes from watching someone realize something everyone else already knew. Not anymore. Then she walked off, the little dog trotting ahead of her. Patricia stood there staring at the house. The hedges were still perfectly trimmed. The lawn was immaculate. The windows had been freshly washed. But the place had no pulse. It felt like a display home, a museum exhibit for a family that no longer existed. Garrett got out of the car and walked to the front gate, wrapping both hands around the iron bars the way you do when you're trying to hold on to something that's already gone. He stared at the house, the place where he'd spent holidays and summers and countless arguments about curfews and grades, where I had taught him how to sand wood in the garage, where our old dog, Clover, used to lose her mind every time the sprinklers kicked on. No mail poking through the slot. No boxes left behind. Even the wind chimes were gone. He rattled the gate. Nothing moved. He looked back at his mother. "Do you have his new number?" "I have a number," she said, scrolling. "He's not answering." Garrett tried too. Straight to voicemail. He sent a text. "Please just talk to me. Please." No response. "Let's try the back," Garrett said, already moving. "Maybe the old gate's unlocked." It wasn't. In fact, it was gone. The back path had been sealed off with a new privacy fence. Thick wood planks, 10 feet tall, No exterior latch. It looked expensive and permanent, the kind of thing you build when you're not planning to come back. As they stood there looking lost, a delivery van pulled into the neighbor's driveway. The driver glanced at them, glanced at the fence, glanced back at them. Whatever he was thinking, he kept it to himself. He walked past like they were invisible. Patricia exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. He's doing this on purpose. Garrett didn't say anything, because somewhere underneath all of it, he knew better. This wasn't pettiness. I wasn't that kind of man. I didn't slash tires or send angry emails or call lawyers in the middle of the night for revenge. I removed. I stepped back, completely and quietly, and left no rope to grab onto. No forwarding address, no assistant to plead with, no loophole to crawl through. Just a closed gate and a locked legacy. The engagement party was supposed to be a celebration. That was the pitch anyway. Rooftop venue overlooking the marina. String lights swaying in the warm evening air. A catered bar with decent whiskey and better wine. People in khaki blazers and summer dresses talking about mergers and private schools and upcoming vacations, like they all belonged to the same quiet club of people who never had to worry about anything. Garrett showed up late, dragging his feet behind Patricia like a dog that had caught a bad scent and couldn't quite place it. His shirt was wrinkled, no tie, sneakers instead of dress shoes. The look of someone who used to be expected and was now merely tolerated. People nodded when they saw him. Polite smiles. One cousin offered a smile that could have stripped paint. Another waved without making eye contact. Everyone could sense that something had shifted. They just didn't know how far the shift had gone. Not until the envelope arrived. It was handed to Garrett by a man he didn't recognize. Mid-50s, pressed linen shirt, carrying the unmistakable bearing of someone who delivers documents for a living. He didn't say a word, just held it out like it was a bill Garrett had been avoiding for months. "What is this?" Garrett said, staring at it. The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. Patricia reached out. "Wait, who authorized?" But the man had already turned and disappeared into the crowd like he'd never been there. Garrett opened the envelope, pulled out the contents, and the world went quiet. First, a photocopy of the form he'd signed at brunch. His signature, still cocky, still diagonal, now highlighted in red. Second, a typed list, clean, precise, emotionless, like an obituary written by an accountant. As of date signed. Caldwell Legacy Scholarship, revoked. Lineage voting rights in Caldwell Holdings, Inc., revoked. Access to Caldwell Family Lake property and land titles, revoked. Heir status under the Caldwell Family Charter, revoked. Named beneficiary status in all Caldwell-held trust entities, revoked. Burial rights in Caldwell Family Plot, Section B, revoked. Each bullet point landed like a separate blow. At the bottom of the page, a handwritten note. Not typed, handwritten. Blood matters, but names carry the weight. You gave yours away. No signature, no need for one. Garrett's hands were shaking by the time he finished reading. Patricia's face had gone the color of old paper. Her eyes darted toward the bar, toward the exit, toward the oldest family members seated near the stage. Anywhere but at her son. A hush spread across the rooftop. People leaned in. Someone asked, "Is that real?" Another whispered, "Did he actually get cut out?" The groom-to-be, poor guy, tried to redirect things with a toast to his fiancée. Nobody lifted a glass. Then, without a word, Garrett's grandfather, my father, the original Caldwell patriarch, a man who had said fewer than 50 words in public in the last 10 years, but whose silence carried more weight than most people's speeches, stood up from his chair. He didn't look at Garrett, didn't say a word. He simply walked across the rooftop, past the crowd, past the string lights, and left. No goodbyes, no backward glance, just a quiet, permanent exit. And in that moment, I think Garrett finally understood the difference between being removed from a guest list and being removed from a bloodline. He tried to laugh it off. "Guess I'm free now, right?" but it came out broken, a dry, hollow sound that nobody even pretended to acknowledge. People began to drift. Conversations resumed, but none of them included Garrett. He became something to glance at and then look away from. Patricia stood beside him, her hand hovering at his back, unsure whether she was comforting him or protecting herself. He stuffed the papers back into the envelope, creasing the corner. Didn't know what to do with his hands. His name was still his, technically, but not legally, not historically, not where it mattered. For the first time, Garrett looked around that rooftop and understood he wasn't part of the family anymore. He was just a guest. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been almost easier to deal with. One big explosion, one clean break. But real exile, the kind that sticks, it's quieter than that. It's the slow withdrawal of warmth you didn't even realize was holding you up. The first thing Garrett noticed was the silence. Not on social media. That was still humming with recycled photos and brunch videos and all the bravado from before. But real silence. The kind that shows up as notifications that never come. His Aunt Louise didn't text after the engagement party like she usually did, with those long, rambling voice memos about nothing and everything. His Uncle Ray, who'd promised to help Garrett land a summer internship at his accounting firm, stopped returning calls entirely. The cousin who used to tag him in every dumb meme unfollowed him without a word. At first, Garrett told himself it was the party, that people were just uncomfortable. He told himself it would blow over, that the older generation was being dramatic, that everyone knew family drama was theater, not law. Then he opened his email. Subject line: Startup Governance Update. From Dylan Caldwell, his second cousin. Hey Garrett, hope all's well. After an internal review, the board has voted to restructure roles within the fund. As part of that process, we've reallocated your observer seat. Appreciated your energy early on. Best of luck going forward. No phone call, no heads up. Just gone. The startup was small, a family seed fund exploring green tech. But Garrett had been there from the beginning. He'd helped pick the name. He'd built the first pitch deck on his laptop senior year. And now, in a single paragraph, he'd been quietly removed. No vote, no voice, no access. He forwarded the email to Patricia with the subject line, "Can they even do this?" She didn't respond for 6 hours. When she finally did, it was one word. Yes. His birthday came and went the same week. Not a text, not a card. The year before, he'd had 17 messages by noon, 2 of them from relatives he didn't even like. This year, a comment from a high school friend. Hope it's a good one, King. Nothing from the Caldwell side, not even an acknowledgement. The real gut punch came 3 days later at dinner. They were eating grilled salmon, one of the few meals Garrett still actually liked at home, and the air had been thick for days. Garrett had been pacing, moping, waiting for someone to finally say something. So, he said, stabbing at his asparagus, I guess the Caldwells really did cut me off. Brandon didn't look up. Just chewed, swallowed, then said, Looks like it. That was it. No, we'll fix it. No, they'll come around. No, that's harsh, man. Just confirmation. Delivered with the same energy he'd used to confirm the weather forecast. Then he sipped his wine and kept eating. It hit Garrett like a bucket of cold water, because until that moment, he had genuinely believed, deeply believed, that Brandon was his backup. That if the Caldwells pushed him out, this new family would catch him. But he wasn't family here either. He was optics, a symbol in Instagram posts and LinkedIn bios. And now that the weight of the Caldwell name had evaporated from his identity, so had his usefulness to the narrative. Over the next week, Garrett tried to rebuild. He texted 3 cousins. 1 replied. He called his godmother, voicemail. He even tried tagging me in an old photo from 2016, captioned, Still proud of everything you taught me. The tag didn't stick. I'd either deactivated or blocked him. He stared at his own last name on his phone screen. Still Caldwell on paper, but hollow now. Like wearing the badge of a company that went out of business. You can say you work there, but the keycard doesn't open any doors. He finally understood what that handwritten note meant. Blood matters, but names carry the weight. No one was angry anymore. No one was yelling or punishing him. They had simply accepted that he'd chosen to leave, and so they let him. Around that time, I got a call from my old friend Dennis Farrow. We'd worked together for about 15 years before he moved his family up to Michigan. We'd stayed in touch the way old friends do, which is to say sporadically, but genuinely. He called to check in the way he did every few months, and I ended up telling him more than I planned to. "You doing okay?" he asked after I'd given him the short version. "I'm fine," I said, and I'm better than I expected, honestly. "That's not the same as okay." I laughed at that. "No, I guess it's not." There was a pause, the comfortable kind. Then Dennis said, "You know what helped me after Janet and I split? I started actually thinking about what I wanted. Not what I was angry about, not what I'd lost, what I actually wanted going forward. Who I wanted to be around." "That's good advice," I said. "I didn't figure it out alone," he said. "I ended up on this app, singletune.com. My daughter made me sign up. I thought it was going to be another swipe left situation, but it wasn't like that at all. Before you even see anybody, they put you through this whole values assessment. What you believe in, what you've been through, what you're actually looking for. They match you on that stuff first. Not photos, not zip codes." Huh, I know how it sounds. But I'm telling you, Gerald, the conversations I had on there were more honest than anything I'd had in the last decade of my marriage. Because you're talking to people who've already done the work of figuring out what they're about. I didn't say much after that, just listened. But I remembered it. He found me pruning rose bushes. Not metaphorically, literally. I was standing beneath a pergola in the northeast corner of the Ashton Botanical Reserve, wearing gloves and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better decades, trimming back some overzealous climbers before they overtook the trellis, volunteer badge clipped to my shirt, afternoon sun on my back, clippers in hand. I knew he was there before he spoke. That particular heavy, uneven footfall. That pause of someone gathering courage for a conversation they haven't rehearsed enough. "Dad!" I kept trimming. "Dad, He swallowed hard. "Please." One snip. Two. The silence stretched, and he had to fill it. "I didn't think it would mean all this," he said. I was angry. Mom said." He stopped himself. Recalibrated. "It was one stupid moment. I didn't think." Now I turned. Slowly. Not for effect, just enough to face him fully. He looked older. Not in his face, but in the way he held himself. Like someone who'd tried to fix a serious problem with tools he'd never been taught to use, and was finally feeling the weight of that. "One stupid moment," I said, tilting my head slightly. "That's what we're calling it." His eyes dropped to the ground. "You didn't think it meant anything," I said. "That's what you meant. You thought signing away your name was a social stunt, a rebrand, a little theater for the brunch crowd." He didn't argue. That was new. "I thought I could undo it," he said. "Or fix it somehow." "You can't." I said it the way you tell someone they missed the last train and the station's already dark. Not cruel, just true. "You didn't break a rule, Garrett. You tore the contract and the bloodline at the same time. You said the name meant nothing, and the legacy heard you." He stepped forward once. "I didn't know you'd take it this far." "I didn't take anything," I said, shaking my head. "You gave it away. I honored your choice." He flinched like the truth had clipped him across the face. And then, finally, the mask cracked. "Do you even care, Chai?" he said, his voice breaking on the last word, eyes going wet. "Do you care at all that I'm standing here trying to fix this?" I looked at him. Really looked. And in that moment, I realized he still hadn't learned the thing he needed to learn. He thought fixing this meant reversing paperwork, filing a legal name change, sending an apology text, clicking undo on something built over generations. "I care," I said. "But caring doesn't mean rebuilding a bridge you burned while people were filming it. It means planting something new somewhere else." I gestured to the trellis behind me. "This soil won't take your roots anymore." He stared at the roses for a long moment. Maybe he remembered being a kid in our backyard, cutting them for his mother on birthdays I'd had to remind him about. "I can change it back," he tried again. "The name, legally, I can do it." It's not about what's on your license, I said. It's about what you meant. And what you meant is loud. It's documented. It's viral. More than that, it was believed. He said nothing. His mouth opened slightly like he'd forgotten how to breathe. I turned back to the roses. There's a bench by the koi pond, I said, not facing him anymore. It has your great-grandmother's name on it. You won't find mine anywhere near it. That's not an accident. A long pause, the longest one. He didn't speak. I didn't turn around. Eventually, I heard his footsteps. Not frantic, not dragging, just leaving. No last-minute appeal, no parting shot. Just distance, quiet and complete. I made one final cut on the branch in my hand. Clean. The kind you don't tape back together. Around this time, I started spending more evenings on the back porch with a cup of coffee instead of a scotch. Small change, but it felt like something. I'd been thinking about what Dennis said. Not obsessing over it, just letting it sit. One evening, I pulled up singletune.com on my phone, mostly out of curiosity. I didn't sign up right away. I just read through what they were doing. The values assessment, the idea that before you connect with anyone, you first have to be honest about who you are and what you've been through, what you actually want from the years you've got left. I sat with it for a while. It wasn't the app itself that got to me. It was the premise that the right starting point isn't a photo or a location. It's a conversation about what you believe in, about what kind of life you're trying to build. I thought about how long it had been since I'd had that kind of conversation with anyone. How much of my marriage had been two people operating in parallel, never quite intersecting where it counted. I put my phone down, watched the last of the light go out of the sky. Then I picked it back up and started the assessment. The boardroom hadn't changed in decades. Long oak table, frosted windows. The Caldwell family crest etched into the glass above a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. Same leather chairs, one for each voting member of the estate, 12 total. Except now only 11 were filled. Garrett's chair sat untouched, not removed, not reassigned, just empty. Like a scar you've stopped covering because the covering hurts more than the scar. No one acknowledged it. No one needed to. The silence around it had become part of the room's rhythm. When the chairman read the attendance roll, he paused for half a second at Garrett's name, skipped it without emotion, and moved on. I sat at the head of the table, calm, a little older, not hardened, not bitter, just clean. The kind of clean you only get after fire takes what it needs and leaves you standing alone in the ashes, finally still. The meeting moved quickly. Quarterly allocations, asset realignments, foundation partnerships. The usual business of a family that has learned to run on structure rather than sentiment. Then came new business. "We have one final matter before we adjourn," said Marion, our trust director, adjusting her glasses out of habit rather than necessity. "The new scholarship. Gerald, would you like to introduce it?" I nodded once, no preamble. "The Caldwell Legacy Grant," I said, "will be replaced with a merit-based scholarship under a new name, the Heritage Endowment for Namesake Descendants." A hum of quiet interest moved through the room. A few members leaned forward slightly. "Eligibility criteria are straightforward," I continued. "Direct bloodline descendants of the Caldwell family who legally retain the Caldwell name and who have demonstrated personal and professional integrity tied to that identity." I didn't look at anyone directly. I didn't have to. A few members exchanged glances, some quiet nods. One of the oldest cousins, Todd, who'd been in this room since before I was born, let out a slow, deep exhale. The kind you only take when a chapter that's been hanging open for too long finally closes. Marion held up the official letterhead for the record. All funds formerly allocated to the Caldwell Legacy Grant have been merged into the Heritage Endowment, now held under irrevocable trust. First disbursement scheduled for next academic cycle. Gerald will personally oversee candidate selection. I leaned back in my chair. No one said Garrett's name, not once, but everyone heard it in its absence, the way you hear a word in the space where it used to be. Later, during the reception that always followed board meetings, I stood by the windows overlooking the private garden. Someone asked politely whether the new scholarship excluded adopted children. It didn't, I told them. Blood isn't always born, I said. But the name must be chosen, kept. carried. I didn't linger. As I moved toward the door, I glanced one final time at the vacant chair. No plaque, no apology. Just a silent record of a decision once made very loudly, now echoing in reverse. A few days after the board meeting, I ran into my neighbor Carol at the hardware store. She'd been widowed a couple of years back. Sharp woman, the kind who volunteers for three things simultaneously and still has time to give you good advice you didn't ask for. We ended up talking in the parking lot for 20 minutes, which is what happens when you live in a small town and you're both not in a hurry. You seem different, she said, studying me with the frankness of someone who's known you long enough to earn it. Lighter. Maybe, I said. You seeing anyone? Not yet. She tilted her head. You heard of Singletune.com? My friend Rosalie, she's 61, went through a brutal divorce. She's been on it for about 4 months. Met someone she actually likes. Said the whole thing starts with this long questionnaire about your values, what you've been through, what you're looking for. She said it was the first time in years she felt like she was being honest about herself out loud. Dennis Farrow mentioned it to me a while back, I said. Well, then two people who care about you are telling you the same thing, she smiled. That's usually worth paying attention to. I thought about Rosalie, who I'd met once at a neighborhood cookout. Quiet, thoughtful woman who'd clearly been through something hard. The idea that she'd found something worth talking about, that was more persuasive than any advertisement. I actually already started the assessment, I admitted. Carol laughed. Good. Finish it. A few days later, I signed the scholarship charter in my study. The final line read, "For those who understand that a name is not given, it is earned and kept." The document now lives in the Caldwell archives, across the room from the family tree. And Garrett, his name is still there, faintly etched, same as it's always been. But next to it, a small mark has been added, an asterisk. It doesn't link to a footnote. It doesn't explain itself. It simply marks a moment in the record, a decision made in public, witnessed by many, and honored completely. It simply means he was here, and then he chose not to be. The rest of the page is still being written,